So, continuing our study in the book of Ruth, when we had our last class together, and I guess what Matt filled in for me last week?
Yes, he did.
Okay, good. And when we had our last meeting together, we were talking about Boaz and his relationship, building relationship with Ruth. And we were looking at verses 13 through 16 of chapter 2. We're going to pick up with verse 15 of chapter 2. And we talked some about, Boaz talking about God repaying her goodness and so forth. And then his relationship with Ruth, because it seems that by mealtime, verse 14, Boaz was beginning to be impressed with the qualities of this Moabitess Ruth. And he spotlighted her by asking her to sit at his table as the owner, the master of all the property, and giving her all she wanted to eat, as well as perhaps a doggy bag to be able to carry her home with her, what term we would use today. And we really had a beginning good conversation about the interaction between male and female, and how that Boaz interacted with Ruth not from the initial standpoint of what can you do for me, or what can I get out of you, but rather Boaz acted from a foundation of knowledge, respect, and self-control, and learned appreciation of her values. Because earlier on in the chapter, when she said, "Why are you being nice to me?" he said, "Well, I've heard of you. I've heard of what you've done." And from his foreman, he was able to have some validation of what had been rumor, and rumor turned into reputation, and that knowledge and respect laid the foundation for his interaction with her later on. But as we look on into this, it's interesting that Boaz could have been realizing that he had a special opportunity here to help one who needed an extra hand. Like I said, he had heard of Ruth, he had heard of them coming back, and how she had been so dedicated to her mother-in-law and all of these things, and now had believed in the God of Israel and was now living in the nation of Israel. And he may have been realizing that I've got an opportunity to do something for someone who needs an extra hand. Now, James talks about this in the book of James in the New Testament, chapter 2, verses 15 and 16. And he uses it as an illustration of faith and works, that if we have the ability to help someone, then we have an obligation placed on us to be able to help that individual. And there's times, I think, in looking at the idea that we have repeated over and over, that is so prevalent in the book of Ruth, that of God's providence, there's times that God may place you at an intersection of need and ability, and you become the providential blessing from the Lord to someone else. Boaz, at this intersection of meeting with Ruth, he stepped up and entered into God's providence and became a tool of God's providence for Ruth and for Naomi. And he goes even further with this. Boaz, verse 15, we'll begin reading. As she got up to glean, New International Version reading, as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up. And don't rebuke her. So, Boaz tells his harvesters, cut her some slack. Don't point her out. Don't embarrass her. Actually, leave some things on purpose for her to pick up and to carry with her. And here's another aspect of his relationship with Ruth that I think is important as we think about our relationship with each other, whether this be in a work situation, whether it be in an association, a friendship situation, or even in a closer or more intimate situation as family. That don't try to take away or change that which made the person attractive to begin with, but rather support and build that for them. Now, it's kind of interesting here when I say that. We would think today, well, if you think I'm all that in a bag of chips, if you are impressed with me, then you ought to be just simply giving me. Boaz never offered her to feed him. Boaz could have just as easily gone over to the grain that had been harvested already, threshed out, and said, go ahead and give her some. Let her carry it home. She ain't got to work in the field. But instead, he let her go back to work. She'd already been working at least a half a day or more. She's out there gathering, working in the heat with everybody else, the dirt, the dust, all of those things. And he tells his employees, he said, you give her some things on purpose, but she's still going to work. And it's interesting that Boaz never considers this giving Ruth the grain she needed and sending her on her way. Now, there might be a couple of reasons for this. One might be that he was wanting to keep his obvious interest in her on the down low. He wasn't going to advertise all this out. And it could also be that he wanted to see where he stood before going too far in this relationship with Ruth. So he was content for Ruth to continue to do what we would call today sweat equity. Not only to cover his tracks, but to be sure of just who Ruth was. Is this real? She's working very steadily. His foreman is really impressed. Okay, well, is this just a show for today? Or is this who she really is? So he may have been, looking at that. I just think it's interesting. And sometimes, when we step up to go into God's providence, there may be some heavy lifting that will be involved with that. It's easy for us sometimes to think that if God is going to do something for me, all I've got to do is just stand there and God's just going to pour it out on me. And of course, if you listen to some people on television, that's what they'll pretty well tell you, as long as you send them your money. But God's providence may very well require, some work on our part. Effort, work, faith, certainly. But along through that faith and in light of that faith, there might be some heavy lifting that we will have to do. And I think also out of this, I'm going to ask for some of your opinions on this in a minute. Help with responsibility isn't a bad thing. He helped Ruth. Invited her to his table. Gave her all she wanted to eat. Gave her a doggy bag. Told his men, leave stuff for her. But help with responsibility, he still sent her back out into the field. She still had to do the work. It's not a bad thing to instill in other people, whether it's our children, work relationships, community, or even as a nation. And there's one other thing about this. That here Ruth is a believer. She has forsaken her country, her nationality, her family. She has accepted the God of Israel. She's believed in him. She has moved to Israel. She's a stranger still. And she has been dedicated to her mother-in-law. All of these things could very easily have translated into Ruth's mind as, well, I'm really doing pretty good here. Somebody ought to be recognizing how good I am, and somebody ought to be doing something for me. Look at all I've done. But out of this example of Boaz and Ruth giving her all of this and then sending her back out to work like a dog in the field, like with the rest of them, is that even as believers, we are not owed anything. It's easy to think, especially in the service of the Lord, that we are owed something because of what we're doing. Peter stated it like this in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 2 and 3. And it's a concept that can be applied to leadership in general, and it works in a lot of other places as well. And this is what Peter says. He says that we should serve not because you must, but because you're willing. Not greedy for money, and not lording it over those entrusted to you, but be examples to the flock. So when we think about God's providence and how He opens doors, don't forget that these three things will come into play as well. Questions, comments? What does that ring a bell in your mind about? Entitlement, yeah, which would fit easily. And I'm going to put E right here because I try to spell entitlement. I'm going to have it all over the board. That we should not ever feel. And how often is it, especially in church? We'll just talk about church, not just this church, but church. It's easy to feel, well, God, I bring food every other week to this crowd, and I bring coffee, and I bring cider every week, and somebody ought to be thinking, well, you know, you're really something. And if you don't, I mean, I'm entitled to it. Really? Not because you have to, as Peter says, but because you want to. And it's not because you're greedy for money or popularity or status, or you can fill in those blanks right on down the line. But as an example, it's easy. And have you seen people in your life history in the church where because they have done a little something, they felt like they were entitled to a whole lot more? Not asking for any names or anything like that. We don't want to. But yeah, we've seen that. Well, I heard about this years ago. I heard a deacon who had told a preacher, he fell out with the preacher about something else. And he come up to the preacher and told the preacher, he said, if I stop paying tithes, they'll have to close the doors of this church. I'm one of the biggest tithe payers in this church. That's entitlement. You know what I'm saying? And I understand the preacher told him, he didn't actually tell him where he could put his paycheck or his tithes, but he let him know that it didn't make any difference. And amazingly, God took care of that church. Who'd have thought that God knew where money was when this person thought he had all of the power? That's an example of entitlement. What else stands out into your mind with this?
I think sometimes on the other end, I realized with Abby Sherman a long time ago, we were going to help this.
That was just after World War II.
There goes your supper.
Well, anyway, make me forget what I was trying to say. This young girl and her husband, they had a little boy, lived in a trailer where she never cleaned up, she never did anything. So we took it on as our project to help her. We took clothes, we would, take her to the doctor or whatever, but it got to the point where you would go to pick her up, but she wouldn't do it. Or you would try to do something for her, and it would get her a ride or something. And we finally got to the point where we just quit.
And I think that's an important part of some of the lessons that come out of this, is that, you know, in your example, this young person, this young lady, needed to do some heavy lifting of their own.
These people think that they're entitled to us, to whoever we're doing, whatever they might do. When they have that mentality that, you know, well, they should be with me. I think when they can help themselves, there are a lot of people who can, but there are a lot of people who can but choose not to. And there are those that can't, that would love to.
Yeah.
You know, they can't, and they would like to be able to help themselves and do for themselves, and they can't do it. And then there are those that can and won't because they feel entitled and they feel that, you know, the world owes them. So do this for them.
Yeah, I mean, this event in Ruth happened 3,000 years ago. But it's just as relevant, you know, the message of Boaz's interaction with Ruth is just as relevant as tomorrow's news, you know, about how we should look at, you know, when we think about helping others. Yeah, we want to help. We should help. James tells us if we have the ability, we ought to do that. That's you know, God has blessed us. Therefore, we can be that providential intersect with someone who hasn't received as much from the Lord for whatever reason. But along with that, don't neglect that there should also be an expectation that there could be some heavy lifting involved. Help with responsibility is something that should be instilled. That yes, you need our help. Yes, you can expect us to help, but there's got to be some responsibility on the individual's part with that, and that you're actually not owed anything. This is coming as a blessing. God has blessed us. We are being a blessing to others. It's not that, okay, God has blessed me, therefore I am obligated to do for you because you're having a hard time.
You know, Billy, not to get political, but I think that, you know, that is exactly what's wrong with our welfare system. There is no heavy lifting, there is no responsibility.
And it goes into, and this really gets complicated because you have those who would but can't. You have those who would, but it costs them when they do because of the way things are set up. If you make $1 above certain levels, you do not qualify for any of the benefits that the government has set up. $1. So there's times that people would get a low-paying job. They find a job, they get a low-paying job, but then it costs them so much that it really doesn't seem financially worth it to them. And then you have those who should, but don't. And this gets real complicated when we think about it from a political and national, 400 million people roughly almost living in America and figuring out, you know, how all this works. But I think as we look at, speaking from potential political, you know, as groups offer their ideas about what to do about poverty. And it was interesting. High Point. I heard this on the radio coming back from Raleigh Friday. They're having a food drive in High Point. High Point is the second hungriest city in America. That's what I said.
Because of furniture.
Yeah, that's something I can figure is that they've lost so much. But that really was a surprise to me. High Point, North Carolina, second hungriest city in America.
What's the hungry?
They didn't say. You know, I don't know which that was.
Because that's surprising to me too. It makes me wonder what's number one.
Yeah, I mean, you know. So, is there a need? Yes. Because you have some of these, particularly this area right here, that they would do, but it cost them a lot to do that. But as we look at the election coming up, and by the way, for the election, I'm reading a book on Joseph Goebbels, the biography of Joseph Goebbels. For those of you who may not know who Joseph Goebbels was, he was the propaganda minister of the Nazi Party in the 30s and 40s. So I'm reading that in light of the upcoming national election in America. So,
Get you focused.
And there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek in that, but not a whole lot. Just looking for because he was a smart propaganda man, really sharp, as narcissistic an individual as you'll ever find. It was very interesting. I've read about a third of an 800 and some, no, close to 1,000-page book so far, but just really interesting. But as we look at the coming ideas that are proffered by our politicians, there should be some of this in here, along with the fact that, and this they will never do, is that we are providential key to some of the people being helped. But those four things should always be looked at.
Well, Billy, you can also put would but won't up there. The would but cost is a lot of times people are smarter because I've had people tell me in certain job aspects, man, here's the way to play the system. You're crazy for being married. We just live together, have as many kids, and then we both get to count these kids as dependents. We work the system.
Yeah.
And so that's where the culture is going to, instead of the culture going to, hey, let's be responsible and go out here, you know, and then just like the would and the cost, yeah, they would or they will get a job in a low-paying thing. That's just to cover checking the box and said, I've got a job, but it's not enough, so I need some more handout.
Yeah.
Or this job isn't worth it, because I've heard young people say, well, I'd work at McDonald's, but I'm not going to pay me but $9 an hour. I want $15 an hour.
Yeah.
I'm worth $15 an hour.
I'm owed $15 an hour.
Because Mama and Daddy said, ain't no use in getting a job if it ain't going to pay $15 an hour.
What infuriates, I'm sorry, I didn't cut
That's
you off.
all right, not minimum wage, you know, and that's the reason now everybody's jumping with California just went, $15 an hour is gonna be their minimum wage. Well, you look, it's gonna come across the country
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
that.
they're expecting it with, if they're looking at New York. If New York and New York State adopts that, then it'll go national.
You get the big city, the big states, and then with the political pull,
Right.
and then that's gonna be,
Yeah.
you know, and so now, they're gonna be $15 an hour. And then where's it gonna go in 5 years after that? Well, $15 an hour, I can't live on $15 an hour. How? My goodness. I'm thinking about quitting my job and going to work at McDonald's for $15 an hour.
Yeah.
It's a lot less hazardous.
A lot less hazard, and you can actually go home at the end of the day and not have to worry about anything.
Yeah,
You
I'm
know?
not gonna get burned, or I gotta go out there and clean somebody's
That's what Teresa's going to do when she retires the end of next week. Teresa retires the end of next week from her job. When the McDonald's goes to 15, you know, Teresa's going to start flipping burgers for 15. You know, can't you see that? Yeah.
Hey, no hazard in it. You go pull your time, stay there to drive through, man. I'll
There you
give
go.
out burgers.
But I
The
think,
girl that I work with, she was a surgical tech. We did the same job. She was a mom. She had, I think she was pregnant at the time of her fourth kid. She was like 24. Well, she told me she was going to quit her job and go on welfare. And we were in the break room, and I very politely told her I did not think that was right. I didn't want to have to keep her up. You have a perfectly good job. I believe that.
How about putting
That
it
was
in
and the thing about the thing about that, and I know we're diverting a little bit, but I know it's there. I know it's there in your minds, and but it brings up the point. When you think about welfare nowadays, after the 1992 elections and so forth, that changed a great deal. That changed a great deal. The most that you can get now is 5 years worth. You get, like you talk about food stamps and these other things, 5 years worth. And it's cumulative. Like if you're on for 6 months here and you get off of it and you go back 6 months, that all counts together. When you hit 5 years, you don't get any more. And that's the welfare check. A lot of it is based upon the number of children. Now, with that young lady, part of that was culture, because they believe in big families. The average Hmong family is 6.5 children, last stats I saw. And we worked with some when I was working in the county that had 11 children. You know, they just have a lot of kids. And that's part of a cultural thing. But at the same time, it's a misunderstanding thinking, because she really would have made more money staying where she was than going that other route. But I think the idea of working the system, of being able to see how can I get over to get as much as I want and still not have to do any more than I want. We have created our own monster. And it's a dilemma to try to figure out how do we, as a nation, balance this thing out. Because when you have a city 60 miles from here, second hungriest city in the nation, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. And it's going to take the coming of Jesus to finally rectify that. My personal concern is that, and this is my opinion, so you know how much that is worth. That and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. My concern, though, is the more you have people fall below the line of feeling that they are providing for themselves, and the more people feel like that is the natural thing to do, the larger the pool you have for the disgruntled groups in America and around the world to feed on. It's a catch-22. We work like a dog. We work like a dog to get what we get, to be successful. And we think about people who are not as fortunate as we for any number of reasons. And it's like, but I've worked for this. I really don't like pulling it out of my pocket and giving it to them. That's a legitimate statement. On the other hand, you have numbers of people around the world who don't like America, period. This is the pool from which they're going to feed. Why do we have so many Americans that want to go work and serve ISIS? For crying out loud. Really? A growing number of people, young people. That's it, young people. The larger this pool gets, the bigger the pool of reactionary, radical, and dangerous. You know, it's like I said, it's a catch-22. There is no easy answer. Yes, Teresa.
I'm just going to say, where I work, we would like to hire people. We cannot get enough people. And we'll train, but, we can't get young people to want to do that.
There's no work ethic in younger generations. I mean, I talk about that with people that I work with at the hospital. I mean, they just don't want to put in what it takes. They want somebody to give them something. You know, and it's like I told that girl that was going to quit and go to Walmart. You know, I don't have a problem helping anybody. I really don't. I'm all for helping people.
Yeah.
But I don't want to keep you up. And there's a big difference in helping somebody and continually letting them live the way they do because they're too sorry to go to work.
Yeah. Goes right back to this right here. Help with responsibility.
I thought about that like that, and I'm not making fun of anybody, but there's a, I don't know what it is, a little, like a miniature woman on stilts at Walmart. She's a group, and she's got her own little motorized thing, and she only has one hand at work, and she greets people at the door. She don't have to come to work. You know what I mean? But that's somebody, I look up to her, I'm like, she gets up every day, and she gets ready. Lord knows she can't drive over here, she has to get a ride. That's a burden on somebody else. She comes in, she puts her 8 hours, she goes home. And I'm like, that's what this country needs, someone like that, you know?
Yeah.
That's what this country used to be.
And when you blend in, And this continues to look at this area down here. When you blend in technological advances, where we can have a machine that can do the job of 50 people. That's 50 people who no longer have that job anymore. And that's one of the things that happened with the furniture industry. Is that it's become, it went all overseas, and when it's finally gotten so expensive overseas, because now they're having to pay their people more, they're bringing it back. Well, there's been so many people who have lost everything they have because that's what their life was. They had a high school education, but they had a good job that all of a sudden took off, and now they don't trust it anymore. So they're telling their children, don't you get in the furniture industry. Don't get out there because you won't have a job. And so now we're going to have to import people.
Well, you're gonna have to use those machines, you know.
You have to build the technology, and once you've built that technology, you're done with people.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're even now using robots to do more and more that are simple things that people used to do. And that drives people down, because if you're my age, it'd be tough for me to try to get out in today's world and find a job if I lose the job that I have. It'd be hard. One, because I'm old. I'm loyal, which is a positive compared to younger folks, but younger folks have all this technology and everything. I don't have that. I don't want that. I did an asynchronous training, did a second taping of the narration this week. And they're talking about putting it on Prezi and using Moodle and all this. And I'm saying, okay, go ahead. I don't know who Prezi is. What is it? You know, I honestly, I have been introduced to Prezi, and it's just a different way of doing things rather than regular PowerPoint, which I love. A regular PowerPoint, click, point, do, you know, it just works. Prezi moves it all over the place. It can go all around, and that's wonderful. I don't know about any of that stuff, and I really don't care. And it would be hard. I would easily fall up under here. But when we have the technology, when we have all of these things that's coming into play, I think as you look at would, could, should, won't, don't, can't, cost, and you look at these items here, this is not easy. And I think for our government, as we think about our country, upcoming elections, it's easy to get into a slogan. We're going to turn America around. We're going to put everybody to work. We're going to get rid of all this immorality. There's a gentleman named Adolf Hitler said the very same thing. So don't attach to the slogan. Look at what's behind it. Yeah, you put everybody to work. You put them in a concentration camp. They were slave labor. But they were all working. He took care of the medical problems. Sent them to the hospital. Little injection. They caught pneumonia and died. That's what he did. There's a lot of people who would like that. The average, I got a thing from the state the other day. The average amount of money that is needed for a person retiring in 2017 is around $300,000 just for medical.
That's just pays insurance for a year.
$300,000. By year 2034, it will be nearly $600,000 that you would have to have after you retire. Okay, I quite don't, my $15 an hour ain't going to do that for me. If I work 2 jobs at $15 an hour, that still ain't going to do it for me. So as we think about going into the election, and we think about what we have as an obligation as a Christian, individual, I think this little passage of Scripture, Ruth 2, verses 15 through 17. That's a powerful passage of Scripture for today's life, for how we look at working with others. And Tricia, you had something you was going to say? Okay. I'm just checking, just make sure. I thought you were going to stress it.
Speaking of entitlement, did you see how the police officers in Baltimore are handling it now?
I hadn't heard that lately.
They just won't, they don't do that. If there's any kind of
Yes,
call in
I
that
did hear
area,
that.
they've all elected just not to go.
Mhm.
So anything that's going on in those 18 blocks, they're on their own. No police.
I think that's more than justified.
And you think about that, on one hand, yeah, I understand why they're saying that. On the other hand, there's the pool down there from which people who are looking for that opportunity are going to say, the cops ain't here. The cops ain't going to take care of you. We'll take care of you.
Join our game.
Going our game. Waco, Texas, 5 games. Waco, Texas, 124,000 some odd people. At least that's what it says on Fixer Upper when they had it up there. And 5 games, 9 people killed, 50 was it injured. They arrested 170. The games have been called. We have one of those games in Catawba
Yeah,
County.
it's
The Outlaws.
well,
There's a division of outlaws that is on 16 Business, just up from Newsom Tire Service.
there's actually one on Old Thomas Street.
And they called for their folks to come, these 5 gangs from all over the country, to come and shoot police. You got a uniform on, we're going to shoot you. Now, you know, there's the pool. There's the danger for our country. All of this has to be taken in consideration. There is no easy answer. There is no easy slogan. We have to look behind it. But I think this passage of Scripture is just foundational to helping us as individual Christians be able to balance out, what is my responsibility in helping people? How far should I go? What should I do? Because yes, we should. And God has blessed us. I'm thankful that, God has blessed me. I have a whole lot more than a lot of people have. I ain't got a lot, but I got a whole lot more than a lot of other people. So what is my obligation with that? I think these things come into play in helping me to balance out my responsibility as a Christian to people that are, as we use our term, disenfranchised. People who don't have, for whatever reason, they haven't been able to be as successful. And for whatever reason, use these elements in helping figure out where that line is for you as a believer. Good points with that.
Is there not one thing that we're entitled to do as believers? The very one thing?
Salvation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only entitlement we really have.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is by grace through faith.
And a profession.
And then it's not by works, because that would put us in an obligation to say to God we're entitled. But no, he says, I will give this to you. You simply believe. And that satisfies that entitlement right there. You don't work for salvation. You can't. The minimum standard for being able to work your way to heaven is being as good as God. That's the minimum standard of entrance into heaven. So you've got to get at least that good. And of course, you'd have to do something with all these other black marks that we have before we ever got that good. We have to have forgiveness. We have to have grace. There is no other way to be accepted with God except that, by His grace, His favor, His mercy. Good points. So, other comments on this? We're about to wrap up our time.
What's our part in all this mess? I mean,
Yeah, I think.
what do we do?
Yeah, I think our part starts with here, the providential. Where does God cause us to intersect with those who are in need? Just like the parable of the Good Samaritan. There was a man who left Jerusalem going to Jericho. Now, we would automatically say today, well, he knew it was a bad stretch of road. He ought to have been prepared for that. He should have carried some friends with him. He should have traveled in groups. He should have gone by himself. But the Scripture doesn't go into that. It just says there was a man. And he fell among thieves who robbed him, stripped him, left him in a ditch. Priest came by. Levite came by. Then a Samaritan. who we would use other racial terms today. He came by, stopped, cleaned the man up, took him to a hotel, told the guy, take care of him, and I'll pay you what you need. That's our part.
And I think that, I mean, that right there rings so true. I mean, I think there's a level of being naive, which I have a hard time balancing that with what I do and trying to get out of the car and go out to people. But just like, what was it, Saturday, there was a man on the side of the road waving him down. And he being a little bit stronger and bigger, was able to stop, and the man needed a ride. And one of the first things the man says when he gets in the truck is, I'm getting ready to go to jail.
Or she told me that before I opened the door. Yeah.
But what ended up happening is the man was so grateful, and before the man got out of the truck, takes in, can I pray with you? I mean, I think it is the Good Samaritan thing of trying. I mean, you don't want to just throw yourself square in the middle of trouble.
Right.
But at the same time, I think we are called as Christians to get down into the ditches with some and deal with some things. I mean, again, I have to find that balance.
Yeah. And I think,
put myself in danger.
yeah, and I think that part of that balance is, when that intersection of providence, where God places you, you want to look at, okay, is this a providential opportunity? Take some time to think about that. And we're going to talk about plans and schemes when we get into chapter 3. Because Naomi came up with a big scheme and plan that thing had as much or more potential to backfire on her and ruin everything than it was to be successful. But when you get that, take the time to think, is this a providential crossroads that God has brought me to? And think about it. Danger. Think about the responsibility. Is this someone who was just trying to bum money off of me? As I had a person in Portland, Oregon stop me on the street when I was walking down toward Voodoo Donuts. If you ever go to Portland, Oregon, Voodoo Donuts?
You know they have pot in it, right?
I don't care what it was. I ate it, man. I even squashed one up and brought it back on the plane. But I had a lady stop me, wanted me to give her some money. She needed to stay in a hostel that night. She didn't have nowhere to live, and it would take $20-some if she would, to be able to spend the night. And I said, okay, I'll give you a couple bucks. She said, can't you give me all of it? I said, no. I'm thinking, okay, I just got suckered here. But so you want to think and look at that before you go any further. What are you doing? Well, I'm taking advantage of everybody around me. No, not me. Help with responsibility. Believers are not owed anything. Look at that. These things can help us as we face those situations to kind of balance out, okay, what is my responsibility? God's brought me to cross the path with this person. Like I had family, and you'll see this a lot, and I'll wrap up with this. Family in Raleigh. And I've seen it in 2 different locations. It's always vice versa. Family in Raleigh. I stopped at a convenience store to get a drink or something. This was some years ago. Guy with his wife and a little kid in the car called me up. Hey, buddy, can you help a fellow American? I've been having some car trouble and I got some problems, and my wife needs to go to Boone. And I need some gas money. Now, I've heard it on the other side of the state in Nashville, they're trying to get Raleigh. Yep. Same word, same verbiage. And I've had that happen several times. This guy, can you help a fellow American be able to do all this? I said, no, I'm sorry. And it turned. Well, I don't see why were you can, that let me know. This was a sucker game. This was a set up sucker game. So, and we learn as we go through life. We learn to where, if providence brings me here, the providential blessed might be, no, I'm not going to help you. That could be the providence. God is saying to you, okay, I want you to learn. Or it could be the Good Samaritan thing, yeah, you need to help. These things will help us as we go through and make those decisions of what to do. Great discussion, y'all. Thank you. Thank you.